I hope you can see my screen and listen to my voice. Yep, thank you. Right, so we'll continue with the remaining transformations from platform. Request all of you to be on mute, and if you have any question, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question. Just to avoid the background noises, thank you. Alright, so the last transformation we saw was row generation. Now next let us look at the SQL transformation. So if you look at the description, it says performs the indicated SQL query operations which it cannot be performed by the other built-in transformations. So just in case if you have some built-in transformations which cannot perform an extensive SQL statement, DML statement, so you can write that within this SQL transformation and you can achieve that operation. And one more thing is SQL does a push down operation and it gets only the required data into the BODS system. So what is a push down operation? So let us say this is my BODS box. Right, so this is a system from where I'm extracting the data, right? And this is my SQL transform. So when I write this SQL transform, right, let us say I can write a condition to join 2 or 3 tables within my SQL transform. Right, so when I write this condition, what it will do is it will push down all the calculations into my backend database, and all the joins and all the calculation is done here, and only the result is sent back to the target system. Only the result is sent back to the target system, which is our BODS in this case. So what are the calculations that generally happens, right? So generally what happens when I select the data from 3 tables, so all the 3 tables data will get and sit in your data services system cache, right? And all these calculations happen here. But if you find that these 3 tables volume is more and you want to do a push down to the database, so you can use a SQL transform, and when you use a SQL transform, all the joins and calculations are done here and only the data, right, only the output is pushed on to BODS. So in this cases, when you especially use a SQL transformation or any push down transformation, you will not use your system cache. You mostly will not use your system cache unless and until to handle the result that we acquired from the system. But not all the calculations will not happen on your system cache. So let's go and create a job. So job underscore SQL, and then let's go and create a data flow, df underscore SQL. Open this, select the SQL transformation, drag and drop, and this is our source transformation. So which means it has a connector on the right hand side. It is not an intermediate transformation. You can have a connector on both left hand side and right hand side. It has a connector only on your right hand side. So if you open the SQL, it has a schema out and the SQL area, right? So the schema out will represent the output structure of whatever we write here. So if you are good at coding and you want to do all the joins at the back end and get 3 columns from one table and 2 columns from another table, then you have to write a select statement here, right? Select star from. So go to your data store. So even before you write this, you need to select your data store here. So first I want to get data from my source data store. So the moment it's selected, it will automatically pick the database version, join rank, and ref its size, whatever we gave here within the data store, and it will. So this is the orders table. So select star from orders. So once you write this, you just click on update schema and your schema out is updated. So if you want to apply some more filter conditions saying that select star from orders where order ID is not null, right? You can use some filters here, or you can use another table, right, and use a join condition, right? So the second mechanism that you can do is select order ID comma customer ID comma employee ID select A dot. I'm trying to identify these T tables as A and B tables. So A dot customer ID and A dot employee ID comma product ID and unit price. B dot product ID comma B dot unit price comma B dot quantity from table A is orders A comma order details B, and then you can define a where condition saying that where A dot order ID is equal to B dot order ID. Right, so if the syntax is correct, then you can just go and click on update schema. Right, so sorry, so some syntax errors. So if you just write the required columns from both the tables, like order ID, customer ID, employee ID, and production ID, product ID, unit price, and quantity from both the tables, and we have defined the aliases for them, and give the join condition between these two tables. So if you just do this activity, whatever the pushdown SQL that you want to write onto your database, if you write this here and just click on update schema, so your schema out will be generated based on the code that you write. So some of the transformations that we might want to perform, or some of the DML statements that we want to perform within data services, sometimes we might face a limitation that these transformations, built-in transformations within data services, could not perform them. So in those cases, right, so if you want to do it directly using your SQL code, you can write that SQL code here, and it will push down all the operations onto the backend database, right? SQL is generally written on a database. It can be an Oracle or it can be a SQL, right? So it will do a push down operation onto the database, and it will get the result into the BODS, right? So this actually saves time and space. So I'm just writing a simple select statement here, select all from table, and then you can use a query transformation if required, a combination where you can select all the columns and map them to output. And then a template table. Select the right data store where you want to write it to, and then connect it with your query transformation. Now go and validate the code to see if there are any errors found. No errors found, so right click and execute the job, and the job will be executed. So now, technically speaking, we don't have any source table, but we have a code which is getting the data from the source table. So if you look at this data flow, so we don't have, technically we don't have a table here, but we have a transformation, and this transformation is going getting executed in the backend data flow, in the backend system, and then it is retrieving these data and it is giving it to the query transformation, and the query transformation is further feeding it into the target table. So these are the records. 830 records from your order table is executed. And if you just look at the execution time, so this will be a bit less compared to your direct table extraction when you do it through a SQL. So there will be significant change in the performance, so you also keep that in mind, especially when you're trying to apply more filters on huge data volume. And if you're trying to fetch that from a database, so better you go ahead and use your SQL transformation, and you write the code there, apply the filters there, so everything gets pushed down onto the database, and only the result is fetched onto your data services system, right? So that is our SQL transformation. And the next validation transformation is the most important transformation, and this is used for validating the data and generating the error reports. So any questions on SQL? Right. So yeah, sorry, somebody has a question.
Hi, Rakesh.
Hey, Jaffer, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to practice for these jobs, but I still don't have access for the SQL Server. And
No, Jaffer, the thing is that I spoke to them. The reason why Ravi could not respond to you is he was, having some fever, and he went to his hometown. So I spoke to Ganesh yesterday, and he said like the same username and password, whatever is given for you to log into the RDP, right, the remote desktop, you can log into the SQL using the same username and password. I thought it was done, because every day I am following up. So you have to give the same username and password that was given for you here.
Okay. Yeah, I tried the same thing, but so which server name I should use?
So
BO41?
no. This is a different system. You can just type localhost here. So if you don't know, it will be mentioned in the email sent to you.
No, there is no information regarding this. So I will use HANA 40 and I will try because I have the user login this one, which I was using for business object tool and the
Okay.
BODS. But
Yeah,
I
so
don't.
BODS will be the same server name. Whatever the BODS server name that you get initially when you try to log in, so
And the
it will be the
login
same.
and the login ID will be the same which I'm using for the BODS, right? Which is
Exactly.
HANA 40. Okay, I will
Yeah,
try.
exactly.
Okay, I will try. Thank
Okay,
you.
right. So just in case if you don't know the server name, you can just type localhost and you can proceed with the connection.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thanks, Zephyr. No, Sandeep, we cannot use SQL transformation on SAP data source systems. It can be used only on your databases. So if you just look at it to answer your question, so if I click on the database, data stores, only the database data stores are displayed, not our SAP. Though we have our SAP data store here, right? The third data store that we have here is our SAP data store. But this SQL transformation will not even identify that. So only the data stores that are connected to the source or target databases will be displayed here. All right. So yes, the next one that we'll be looking at is the validation transformation. And if you look at the description, it says routes incoming data based on the validation conditions you specify. So it's a very simple definition. So when you get some data set, right? So it separates this data sets, routes this data sets into based on the condition you specify. So let me put it a bit clear here. So what is validation? I go ahead and validate the data based on a particular condition, saying that if this condition is correct, you should pass, and if your condition is not satisfied, you should fail. So the output of your validation transformation is two tables. One is your valid table and the other one is your invalid table. So this is my source and this is my validation. And this is my valid table and this is my invalid table. So now when I pass my source data through my validation transformation, the output should go to valid. So what are the conditions that get satisfied here? So the conditions that we specify here. So if your data set is satisfying those conditions, those records will go to the valid. And if your data set doesn't satisfy those conditions, those go to your invalid data set. So the reason why we capture this invalid data set or error reports, we can call them as error reports as well. So we give this error reports to the data owners and ask them to cross-check if whatever we captured in the invalid is correct, and if it is correct they will have to give us a sign off on that. If it is not correct, they have to go and tell us what changes we have to do in the rules so that we can also include these data in the valid data set. So this validation transformation validates the data and it either sends it to a valid table or an invalid table, a simple definition. So let's go ahead and build a job for this, but if you want to just compare it to a real-time example, so we use three types of validations on the data, right? So this is my source table and I use three types of validations. One is my validation mandatory, validation format, and validation lookup. So I call this as mandate and lookup and format. So these are the three standard validations that SAP has proposed, or even on the initial experiences that the initial projects that was done by SAP. So these are the three validations that are generally required on your data. So I'll just give the names here. This is my source table, and these are the three validations that we are doing. And here I will use a merge valid, and merge invalid. I'll tell you why I'm using a merge statement here. Alright, and then my valid table and my invalid table. So even if you go and look at the SAP best practices or any standard data services project, they will definitely follow these three validations, right? So I connect my source. As I told you, source is one to many. From one source you can feed to multiple target tables or intermediate transformations. So this is one to many. So now once my mandatory validation is done, I get a valid table and an invalid table as an output. So sorry. So if I do my lookup validation, even I get a valid and invalid. So in this case, what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to push one valid set here and another valid set here. So I told you already that your target tables will not accept input from many transformations, because if you look at the backend story, when this one is writing, so this table will be locked for this transformation, and unless until this entire data is pushed in, it will not be released, so that something else will go and write the data. But in this case, these two try to write parallelly into the target table, and it is not allowed. So it is not many to one. Target table is not many to one. So only one transformation at a time can write this. So what I can do, I can use a merge transformation here to capture all my valid data sets, right? Merge that into a single data set and then load it into my target system. And similarly, I'll capture all my invalid data sets into my merge invalid, and from there, as like one to one, I will write it into my target table. So let's go and build this one on the system. So job validation, then go and create a data flow df underscore validation. So validation is a compulsory process in any project. So if you generally look at the project cycle of data services, so initially we start with extraction or scoping. So we extract the required data, or we call it as scoping. Then it goes to deduplication. Especially, so this is actually the methodology. What I'm typing here is called as all-in-one methodology. It is called SAP all-in-one methodologies, and this methodology is used especially when you are getting the data from a database tables or flat files. So there is a high possibility to have duplicate records. So you go for a deduplication, and once the deduplication is done, you do a validation, then you do enrichment. So you pick all the valid records from here, and on that you go and apply a business rule. And once the business rule, so just in case if you are doing new output columns in enrichment, so you go and do a post val as well, and after that you go and do a load mechanism. Right, these are the phases of the project. In AIO, extraction, scoping, deduplication, pre-val, you do a validation there, enrichment, apply the business rule, post-val, again on the new output columns and calculated columns, you do a post-load validation. I mean, that depends on what you do here. So if you are creating more output columns and you are doing a lot many complications and you are scrubbing the data in the enrichment, you can go ahead and do a post-load validation. And once it is done, you generate a load table or a structure by using the load phase of this one. So this is the methodology. This is a process for AIO. AIO stands for all-in-one methodology. And even if you look at the BPDM, best practices for data migration, so this is one more methodology which has phases like mapping, which is nothing but you're extracting the data and mapping it to the required target columns. Then you go for validation, and the next one that you will go for is enrichment. So this BPDM is especially for SAP tables, SAP sources and targets, and non-SAP sources as well, but the target is SAP system. And when we are especially extracting the data from SAP source, we don't expect the data to have a duplicate data. So that is the reason why we are doing mapping, validation, and enrichment. Right. So these are the phases. So in both the methodologies, right? So in both the mechanisms, the best practices, right? We have a validation, and validation is a pretty important phase of the project, right? In my recent project, where we worked on the employee validation reports, right? So we have the global employee data consolidated, and on top of the data, so the customer wanted some quick validation reports to make sure that this data is valid or not. So if you just categorize the employee table, so if you look at the broader picture, so what kind of employees we have? So either we have a full-time employee or we have a contractor working with us. So if it is a contractor, the contractor should have a contract start date and an end date. And if it is a employee, a full-time employee, he should have a job start date, but he should not have an end date on his records. And next one, right? So the next one that we validated was if he is having a proper code. If he is having a proper employee code or a contractor code, or to which group he belongs to, which subgroup he belongs to, who is his reporting manager. So is he working on the same area where his reporting manager is working on, or he is from a different location. So sometimes a person reports to himself, right? So who is our top level management guy. So these kind of error reports, we almost generated 14 error reports or 16 error reports on the data, and these error reports are written into one particular outbound directory. So on a daily basis, so we used a global variable and mapped side date to that global variable, and when we are giving the file name, so flat file name, so here generally you give the flat file name. So what you can do is you can always say concatenate the global variable. So if you create a global variable $GB time for a timestamp, so you can concatenate your name with a global variable .txt, or in the initial script we can go and create another global variable which has a concatenation of this name and the timestamp. Right. So every day the file gets generated with that day's timestamp, and we can easily identify which day's error report is what. So you can go and easily pick those error records from that outbound folder. And another thing that we did for that project is an email notification, where an email will be distributed to the distribution list once the job execution is successfully done, or failure or threshold is crossed, so whatever we do. So those things will be sent to the distribution channel, a group of people who needs an update on this employee data. So it will be sent to the stakeholders saying that, okay, these many records are inserted and updated and all the error reports are present in this folder. So now as we are talking about the validation, that's the reason why I'm getting those error reports into picture. So now let us go and look what are the three different types of validations that we do. So I'm taking orders table as my source, and then I go to the transforms tab, select my validation, drag and drop it thrice into my workflow, or sorry, data flow, thrice into my window. So first one is my mandatory validation. So just select it, press F2 and type underscore MANDT. The second one is my mandatory format validation, and the third one is my lookup validation. Right, so these are my validation transformations, and now we will go and see what is there within a validation transformation. Or if you want to complete the framework first, you can just connect all these things and pull in merge transformation. So that is merge for merge valid and merge invalid. Merge valid and merge invalid, and then I'll have two tables. One is my valid table and the second one is my invalid table. Right now, every validation transformation has two outputs. One is pass and the second one is fail. So the moment you connect it with the subsequent transformation or a target table, it will go and ask you whether you want to connect pass here or fail here. So select pass and pass and pass, and likewise connect fail here. And from here you can directly link this pass to valid, and you can link this invalid, merge invalid to, fail to invalid tables. So this is my validation data flow. So this is my entire process in which I do validate my data. Now let us go and look at what I have to do within these transformations. Now if you open the mandatory validation, so this is how your validation transformations will look. So you have a schema in, you have a schema out, and here you have the validation tab. So in validation tab, again you have two tabs. One is your validation rules and the second one is your validation transformation options. So first let us go and look at the options. So on failure of a validation, so what you do, you validate the data and the output is a pass or a fail, right? So that is the meaning of validation transformation. So on failure, collect data validation statistics. So the system will go and automatically pick the validation statistics on why this particular transformation is failing, and also you can go and collect some sample data and tell that these are the records and this is the reason why this particular validation is failed, right? And output rule violation information. So when a particular record is violating the validation, which means it is not satisfying the condition that you specify within a validation, so the output data set should have an additional column called row ID. I'll tell you why we need a row ID. So if you look at the schema out, so it is divided into two sets. One is pass and the second one is fail. So pass has the same structure as your source table, but fail has a little different structure. So these three columns are additional to your fail structure. One is error action, error column, and row ID. So error action will say if that is a pass or fail, right? So by default in the fail it will have fail. And error columns, right? So what is the reason for that failure? So using data services, we just not only give the bad data to the customer, but we also give them a reason why each and every record is failed. So in that bad data set, we can go and tell them like, okay, this record is, the reason for this is this one, the reason for the second record failure is this, and the third record failure is this, and everything is captured in this error columns. And this here, we will capture the row IDs on the data. So I'll show you where we will get these things. And next one is the validation rules tab, the first one. Now if you go and look at this, either you click here, right, you don't have it enabled, right, if you want to add a business rule, right, you just click on add and it will open a rule editor window. And here I'm typing it as rule mandatory. So if you look at this, right, so what is mandatory? This means this particular column. You do a validation transformation on a particular column, right? So point number one, when you are doing a validation transformation, you do it on a particular column. To say that this condition on this column is satisfied, then only it goes to a valid data set. If not, it goes to the invalid data set. So when I say order ID, and if I click on add, so I'm applying a mandatory validation. So what I mean by mandatory here is this particular column should not have null values. It should definitely have some of the other data pushed on the column. So this is my mandatory. So generally on which columns I go for mandatory? So when a column is a primary key, I go for a mandatory validation. So next one, if you want to remove this validation in the future, you can just uncheck this. So there is no need for you to remove the entire data flow. You can just uncheck and check this one. And you know, one more thing. So if you people worked on the database side or just have fundamental knowledge on the database, so one bookish definition that we will read all the time is null is never equal to null, because null is not equal to anything. So if you are trying to do some comparisons on the data, and if your input data set is coming as null, so you better ignore that record than comparing it to any other system. So you can have this checkbox here saying that ignore if null. And the second one and the last option that we have is action on failure. So if a record passes through, right, and if that fails, right, you have these options here. You can send it to fail, that's a normal story. Then you can send it to pass, right? So though a record is failed, you are sending it to pass or send it to both. So why will customer need a failure record in the pass table, right? Or why he wants it to be present in both? So in my recent project, we did this activity where we captured both the eliminated employees, or when I say eliminated employees, so the employees who go through each and every employee, let it be a contractor or a full-time employee, they will have a status code, and this status code will tell if this guy is active, inactive, retiree, terminated, right, or discarded. So these are the different 5 statuses that we maintain on the data. So now if if it is an employee information and if it is related to contractors, so contractor work in one project and he has a tendency to come back into the company or into those existing environment again in the second project, right? It is not that one contractor who is mapped to this project is done and he will never again work with the same customer, right? They can utilize him. If he is working good, they can go and freelancers or contractors, they can be called for some other project with the same company. So in those cases, right, they don't want this information to be deleted, because especially if you go for some manufacturing industries or pharma companies, so they go through a lot of process and background verification. So they have spent an ample amount of time and money on investigating if this is the right resource, he is not from the rival company, he has a good background, and all these things. So they don't want to reinitiate the process if a person is coming back to the project again. And on a larger scale, they cannot deny a reinitiation process if you don't preserve the history of this guy, right? So if you don't preserve the history of this guy saying that, okay, he worked with so-and-so companies and he also already worked with us. So if you don't maintain that kind of information, so it has to go through the process. So, the customer wanted to maintain the previous records as well. So that is the reason why we had to send it to both pass and fail. But when we send it to pass, we maintain an additional column and we hard coded that column with a status failure, right? So we sent it to pass, but we also maintain an additional column which will, if you go and open the valid table, you will go and identify that, okay, this particular record is bad because it has a indicator for that one. So next one is column validation. If you just click on the drop down, you can pick the column on which you validate, right? So this is a mandatory validation, which means it is not null. So you can do all these condition checks here. So one is less than 1000. You can give some numeric value here. And next you can give greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, not equal to, and equal to. So these are the different these things that you can do on the data. And next one is null. So if a particular column is null and you want to validate the data based on that, you can say is null or is not null. Is not null is for mandatory validation. And then you have like. So if I have something in the data, so if all my order ID should starts with ORD, so I give %ORD. So it is like this. So the data has a tendency to have these three words. So you maintain the % symbol, or in between it has a start range and an end range, right? And next, it's a match pattern. So this is one more important thing that we did. So when you have a data, right, so especially a plant information, so it can be on SAP systems it is maintained as 1000, 2000 and so on, but from non-SAP systems, right, it is maintained as plenty 1, or if it is based on location, Aurangabad 1 or Madras 1 and Madras 2. So they go by locations, right? So they go by locations and maintain these names. So in this case, if you look at this, so it has a pattern. It has a pattern where you call it as alphanumeric pattern. It is not just numeric and alphanumeric. And it has one number and 4 characters before that. So how do I define the pattern here? So all the characters are defined by X's, right? If it is caps, it is a caps X, and if it is a small, it is a small x, right? So, and all the numbers are defined by lines. So this is my match pattern. So if you have A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4 as an input data, so I can give A, B, C, D, 4 x's and 9999 for numerics. So if it is like capital A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, right, if the data is this, I have to give the pattern as capital X, XXX, 9999, right? So this is the pattern that I have to give on the data. If this pattern is met, if the incoming data is of this pattern, so it will be valid, and if it is not, it will be kicked off into the invalid data set. And inset. So inset is something like you give it like this. It is within this set. 10, 20, 30, 40. So it should be only in this set. The list of values, the LOVs that you specify, it should be only in this set. And there are 2 more. One is exists in the table and conditions. We look them when we are looking at lookup validation, lookup format, because exists in the table is lookup validation, and custom condition we do it in format validation. So we'll go and look at it there. So this is my condition, right? One second. So this is my condition saying that this particular column is a mandatory column and it should not have any nulls. Then click on OK. Now, if you want to remove this in the future, so you can just uncheck it here, right? If you want to modify this, you can double click on this one, right? Or if you want to delete this, you can select this and remove this validation, right? If you want to add it one more time, mandatory, then mandatory, and send on failure, column validations, and say employee is not null, and click on OK, and your validation is added. So this is my mandatory validation. So whenever my data pass through this connector from here, if all my records pass through this will go and validate if my data is good or bad, and based on that it will either send it to pass or send it to fail. So if that condition satisfied, not null condition is satisfied, it goes to pass, and if it is not satisfied, it goes to fail. And this additional information that we have, error action, error column, and error ID, so these three will capture the position of the ID, position of that particular record, the action, which is failure, and the reason for this thing. So it will capture that this particular record is failed due to mandatory validation. So then we can easily understand that what are the condition that we specified is not null, is not satisfied there, and that is the reason why this particular record is captured. So you can go and immediately go and validate the data and see if that particular column has null. If it is yes, then your validation is correct. So that is your mandatory validation. Mandatory, which means is not null. The second one is a format validation. So what is a format validation? So if you look at this, the customer ID is of varchar 5, which means this particular customer ID has 5 character length. Shipping address has 60 character length. So the maximum allowed data is 60 characters. So if you have data greater than 60,000 as an input, right, so it will throw an error. So even if you look at the city, so city can't be more than 15 character length. Region can't be more than 15 character length. Right? Country can't be more than 15 character length. So I'll do it on address or ship name here. So name, I will just keep it as 20. It's valid, and greater than 20 is invalid, so that we can capture some of the some of the record sets there. Right, so format, so the length of shipping name, right, this length of ship name should not be more than 20 character length. So that is my validation rule. So format validation is on the length of the column. So let us go and do it. Add a validation rule and call it as format, then column validation, ship name, go to the drop down, select custom condition, right? So this is where you can go and write your condition. So length is a built-in function. So if you want a length of a particular column, right? So each and every column has each and every row has a different value in that column. So let us say I have a table where there is a column called region. So if my data pops up, so it will say the region is India, and if Jaffar's pops up, it says it is USA. So likewise, that particular location has a distinct value for each and every row. So I can go and capture the length of that particular thing, right, in a new output column saying that length of this region. So if it is India, I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, INDIA. So if it is USA, it will be 3. If it is Canada, CANADA, it will take 6, right? If it is United Arab Emirates, it will take 3. So I can count, I can calculate the length of that particular column. So that's a built-in function. You can just type len and you will get that one. And length of the column that we want to cross-check is ship name. So just type the table name orders and you will see all the columns here. Just double click on the column and it will be selected. Close the brackets and say less than or equal to 20. So this is my custom condition that I am specifying. And if you have more conditions, you can specify end operation here. And you can go and add your additional conditions. Right? You can go and write your custom conditions in this window by selecting a custom condition. And here I'm mentioning the length of this particular column is less than or equal to 20. So if it is beyond 20, then it is a bad data. So just click on OK and it says some syntax error. Check the syntax and fix it again. Length of orders dot ship name is less than or equal to 20. Invalid expression syntax at line 1. Okay, right. So that's a syntax error. So I just gave a semicolon by mistake, and when I clicked on it, it says a semicolon was found. So you can remove this and just click on OK. And this format validation is done. Format is checked on length of the column. So the main reason is, especially when you are trying to load, the material information into the target SAP system. So it should be of some fixed length. So 10 characters or 18 characters. I don't remember it properly. Sometimes I get confused. So plant information is, it should be 4 character length. So just in case if you are trying to, get some additional length record and try to push it into the target SAP system, the SAP system will not accept. It will accept only 4 character length. So in that case, that record gets kicked off. So to avoid that, because if while loading, if a record is getting kicked off, you don't have a count like how many records are loaded and how many records get kicked off. So to avoid that kind of activity, so you make sure that you do a format validation to capture the length of the data. And the third one is a lookup validation. So just now I gave an example of plants from non-SAP system. So they are maintained as AUR1, MDS1, MDS2, then HYD1, HYD2. So if they have values like this, but their equivalent value is something else, right? So let us say HYD1 is 1000, HYD2 is 2000, HYD3 is 3000, and MDS1 is 4000. So 1000, 4000, these are understood by the target SAP systems, but not HYD1 or MDS1. So in those cases, there should be some lookup table onto which you can look up these values, the legacy values, and get the target values. So this, this lookup table should be like this. Legacy value and target value. So if it is like HYD1, it is 1000. Then HYD2 it is 2000. 3, it is 3000. Then MDS1, it is 4000. So if I have a table like this, so I call this kind of tables as my lookup tables. Sorry, bad throat. So these kind of tables are called my lookup tables, and this table has my complete information. So it has both my source values and their equivalent target values. So what I will do, I'll look up my input data set. So my input data set, so let us say it has these 3 columns, right? And one column in that input data set is my plant column. So what I will do, I'll do a quick comparison on this plant data. So I'll do a quick comparison on this plant data to this one I'm looking up, right? And if it is present here, then it is a valid record. If it is not present here, that is an invalid record. So this is level 1 of lookup. And there is another level of lookup where you get a lookup on this column, right? Compare if it is good, then get its equivalent record and replace the actual value with that. So lookup extension, right? So you do a lookup and get the relevant value, the target value for that one. So these are the 2 types of lookups. The first one, as of now, we are doing the first lookup, which is you just look up your source data into a list of values and say that if it is valid or invalid. So one more example, right? Unit of measure. So unit of measure can be kgs, pounds, meters, centimeters, inches, quantities, box, pieces, right? So it can be your unit of measure. So end user enters something like XYZ because he did not understand what is meant by unit of measure, or he gives his name there. The system can easily go and accept because that is a character, a varchar. So, but if you want to have a valid data set, you want to kick off those kind of records, then you have to go for a validation on that particular column, and you have to look it up, right? So look up your input column on the list of standard unit of measures, the list of values on the SAP BO side. The reporting side, we call them as LOVs, list of values. So it will go and cross check that one, and if it is present, then it is valid, and if it is not, it is invalid. Another good example, on day-to-day life where we go and see this validation is on your flight booking portals, right? So whenever you go to a flight booking portals, you should have a source drop down and your target drop down. So your source and destination should be in that list. So if it is not there, then you don't have an airport there, right? So it should be a valid one. So all these list of values are my lookup information. So to do that one, click on this and call it as lookup, column validation. Then go and say if my order ID in this table exists in the table, right? So exists in the table. And one mandatory thing for this one is, it can't look at the template tables. It can look at only my permanent tables, right? So the reason why we do that is permanent tables is understood to have a fixed structure. It will not be dropped and recreated. We discussed recently about it. So one more thing is, when I run a job, so the data gets appended to the target table if it is a permanent table, but not dropped and recreated. So there is a possibility that I maintain a fixed data set in those tables rather than loading my volatile daily data. So it can only look at my permanent tables. It cannot look at my template tables. So if you want to do a lookup on a table, first you make the table as a permanent, and then only you can utilize that in lookup. So how to make it as a permanent? You already knew that. You need to select a template table, right click and say import, and it will be a permanent table. So order details, and then you have the order ID. So within that table you have order ID, and just click on OK. So everything is built in the backend. So if your order ID exists in that particular table's order ID, then it is a valid record, and if it not, it is an invalid record. Now I am done with my three validations. Mandate, where it is not null; format, the length of that particular column is less than or equal to 20; and lookup, if your source data is present in some other table, then it is a valid entry. If it is not, then it is an invalid entry. Now, the entire data set first flows through this, right? And the pass will go to pass and fail will go to fail. Now the entire data set flows through this, and pass will go to pass and fail will go to fail. So now let us look at pass. There is a possibility that a record 1 is valid here and also valid here, which means I'm trying to send that same record into my target system twice, which means I'm potentially I'm deliberately going and creating a duplicate here. So what I'm trying to do, I'm using a query transformation, and within the query transformation I'll go and select distinct rows, right? So I'll select distinct rows. So if a record is valid in one validation, and if it is already present in my target table, and the second validation is trying to send it again, so it will not pick that. So because I'm merging all these things, so when a record, same records flows in from here, here and here to this one, so this one has 3 records on the input data set, and this will feed all the 3 records to our query transformation, and query transformation will select the distinct record, which is one record out of those 3, and then it will send it to your target table. So this is mandatory to avoid duplicates, but I don't keep that on my invalid table, right? I don't keep that on my invalid table because a record can fail here and fail here and fail here. So I want to know what are the possible reasons that this particular record has failed. So I don't maintain distinct here. I want to capture all the 3 failures, because if I know that it is failure here and I go and scrub this data, now again the same record will get failed for this and this validation. So I don't want to take chances, so I don't use a distinct statement here. So I capture all my invalid records. So just validate this to see if there are any errors. No errors found. So select the job, right click and execute. Now the job is successfully done. Go to the data flow, click on the valid records. So you have all these records as valid because they satisfied this and this conditions. And also go to the invalid table. You have some 201 records invalid. So if you look at the source count, so you have what, 830 source records, and if you look at the valid table, 830 records are there, which means out of which 201 are invalid records. So some of these records got kicked off. So let us say the first one, so this is an invalid record, right, because it failed for some reason. So let us go and look at it. So the possibility is, so it can pass here but it can fail here, the same record. So it is present in both. So once we are done with the validation transformation, we'll do a deletion script. So we use the script template here, right, and on top of this we'll go and write a statement saying that delete star from valid table, select distinct row ID from, or just let me put it this way, we write it like this. So delete star from valid table where row underscore ID is equal to, or row underscore ID in select distinct So I'll write a query like this. So first it is having a subquery. So what it will do, it will go and execute the subquery, and it will pick all the distinct row IDs in the table. So if this row ID is present in my valid table, so if this row ID is present in my valid table's row ID, then what I will do, I'll go and delete that row ID from my valid table, which means if a record is present in invalid table, I'll go ahead and delete that from my valid table to make sure that I don't have any invalid records in my valid table. Right, so this is what I do. Once this data flow is done, I'll go and write a SQL script that will go and delete the data if some records are present here, so those records will be deleted. So that is the script. So but this is how we use the validation transformation to validate the data and generate valid and invalid outputs, right? So this is a validation transformation, and the next one is a map operation. So maps NRDM schemas, right? So it deals with XML data. So now let us first go and look at a different approach for it now. So any questions?
Hey Rakesh.
Yeah, Jafar, go ahead.
When we process all the record and we found about 230 invalid records, so how we do process this again?
So once my validation data flow is done, I'll go and create a script here. So within the script, I will say SQL of delete star from valid table where row underscore ID in, then write a subquery, select distinct row underscore ID from invalid table. So this is the statement that I write. So what it will do, it will go and first select the distinct row IDs in the invalid table. So let us say 5, 7, 10 and 11. These 4 are my distinct invalid row IDs in my invalid table. So what it will do, if that row ID is present in the valid table, it will go and delete that particular row ID. So this statement will get executed post your validation. So this will go and delete all the records, all the invalid records that are present in your valid table. So once you execute the job, the script will go and delete that. Is that clear, Jafar?
Okay. So what about the records which are in the invalid table?
So invalid can have duplicate records, not a problem, because this particular ID can fail for so many reasons, right? So if I just add that to filter and click on OK, so now it failed for only one reason, but there is a possibility that a particular record.
I got it. Actually, I'm asking, for example, if there are some records, right? So we want to reprocess them. So we have to run this job again.
Yeah, so they have to again come through your input, right? So once, so these guys gives us a sign off. So two possibilities. One thing is they will give us a sign off on these records, or they will scrub the data and send it back in tomorrow's file, right? So we need to process. Yeah, process them, or they will also ask you to change your business rule. Third possibility is like this business rule is very strict and harsh, so you just tweak it a bit so that we can also process these records. So we will do that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, man. All right. So next one is, we will see how to handle the XML data. So map operation. Sorry, not map operation. This transformation XML map is used for mapping XML data, or it is simple. In simple, I can say it is like a query transformation for XML data. Right, so you have multiple options in a query transformation. You can write if then else decoded, you can apply filters, you can apply where condition, you can apply joins, so you can do whatnot, you can do everything. So prior to this version, right, so 4.x, you don't have XML map available in data services. So this is a new add-on transformation, and this is something like a query transformation for XML data. So now what is XML data? So data that is not in a proper structure. Unstructured data is called, or the data that is present in a nested structure is called my XML data. And what are the different transformations that I can use to handle the XML data? One is query transformation, then the second one is XML map, and the third one that I can, the third transformation that understands XML data as XML pipeline. So this one is a recent transformation. So in the previous versions it is not there, XML map. So as I told you, query transformation is hero of the story. You can also handle XML data with a query transformation. So now, how do you add XML data to data services? Right? How do you say that, okay, this is my XML file and go and connect? So it is just like your flat file. So like flat file, you can also connect your XML file to BODS. So when it is XML, there are a few things that you need to keep in mind. So first, you cannot directly connect a .xml file to BODS. No connections. So if you look at the XML data, we have two types of files called as XSD or DTD. So XSD stands for XML standard definition or schema definition, and this one stands for data type definition. Right, so if you look at this, these will be the structure tables, structured files. So nested structure files. This will not have the data, but this will have the structure, the metadata, and then the data file points through these XSDs or DTDs, and then then they will connect to your data services system. So now let me put it this way. First you have an XML data file, and this connects through XSD or DTD, and these DTD files connect to BODS. So when you want to read an XML file, you make sure that you have an XSD or DTD available for that, right? So also your XML code can be pretty much converted to JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, which is the simplest form of an XML code. So from which also you can read the data to your data services. So you need either a JSON file or XSD or DTD file. So how does these look? Sorry. So this is my XML source, and these are my XML files. So if you look at this, so document type definition DTD, this is my DTD file, and XML document, so this is my .xml file, right? So this is XML file schema, this is my XSD, right? So these are the three different types, and this one has the data in it, and these two are my structure files. So these are samples downloaded from internet, so I'm using this for the training purpose. I can share these files with you, or you can download these from internet. So now how do I attach my XML files to data services? As I told you, the first step is to attach the XSD to data services, and then only go for, and then from XSD link your XML file. So to add an XSD, you can go to your formats tab of your local object library, and either you have DTDs or XML schemas. So you select the XML schema, right click and go for new, or you can go from project new and you can go for XML schema. So either ways, or you can just do a right click here, go for new and go for an XML schema. So this is a front end screen or a pop-up screen that comes for XML schema, and here the first thing is you need to browse and identify your source file. So click on browse and address. So this is my XML schema file, XSD. If you just look at the extension, it says .xsd, XML schema definition. Then click on the root element. So for every XML file, right, so we need an XSD data file and also what is the root element on that one. So since I know about this, I'm selecting postcode address as a root element, and you can give a format name ff underscore postcode address, right, underscore src, or you can call them it as nested structure, or you can just give it as postcode address, whatever you want. So these are the three things that you need to fill. One is browse the file, then select the root element and give the name and click on OK, and your XML file is added. So this is XSD, not XML, sorry. And if you open this, this has a structure. This is a nested structure. So something similar to our SAP iDocs. So it has header and line item. So for every postal code that it has here, it has one or more addresses available. For every header, there is one or more line items available, right? So this is my nested structure. So these three transformations, query transformation, map, XML map, and XML pipeline, can understand these kind of source and targets, and they can interact with them. So now let us see how a query transformation works, right? So job underscore qt underscore XML demo, data flow df underscore XML demo. Now so this is rule number 1. You connect through an XSDR or DTD. The rule number 2 is when you drag a XML file to job, right? So here is job. So there are two types of jobs. One is your batch job and second one is your real-time job. So if you pull this XML file into a batch job, it should be either XML file source or a file target, XML file target. So if it is a real-time job, it should be a message source or a message target. So just keep this in mind. This is a thumb rule. So if it is a batch job where you are using XML file, so it should be a file because batch jobs understands only the files. And if it is a real-time job, it should be a message. So it can be either a message source or a message target. So it should be a message. The third thumb rule that you need to do is once you make it as a source or target, you need to add your target or source XML file to this. So you should point this XSD to your XML file. So if it is your target file, then you have to create one XML, and if it is your source file, you need to map it to your XML file which has the data in this. So drag and drop it. It will ask you 4 options: file source, file target for batch jobs, message source, message target for real-time jobs. So I'll go and do this one. The next third step that I need to do is click on this and point it back to some XML file which has data in that one. So select file, go to this folder, and this is XML document. .xml is an extension. So if you just check here .xml, just go back, and now you see your XML file added to your data flow. And it also got a magnifying glass. Earlier this magnifying glass was not there, and now it has. So if you click on the magnifying glass, first it will go to the parent node. So double click on the parent node, which is post group, and it says it has 2 postal groups. One is SS019TB and DE150LQ. So double click on the first postal code. It has 3 addresses related to SS019TB, and for DE150LQ it has 2 postal codes. So Eaton Halls and Garden Cottages, right? So this is header and line item data, right? Just any confusion, please let me know. Okay, now let us see how a query transformation can handle this one. So if I connect this to a query transformation and connect it to my source. So guys, you can hear me, right? So I see some pop-up here saying that might be experiencing network connection difficulties. So just confirm if you can listen to my voice and see my screen so that I can continue. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. Right, thanks, Sandeep. So now this is my nested structure which my query transformation can easily understand, right? So my query transformation can also read unstructured data and structured data. So this is my nested information. So I want to break this into a flat structure. So this is my nested structure. I want to break it into a flat structure. So I select it from here, drag and drop it into my schema out. And I told you that few options of query transformation we'll be looking when we are dealing with nested data. So you select this, right click, and make it current, right? So you go ahead and unnest this. So unnesting means you are removing this parent node for that. So similarly, go with this. So now if one node is current, the other node is grayed out. So this is grayed out. So you don't see mapping here. But if you select this, since it is current, you see a mapping here, right? And every segment, this one, or this one, they have a different set of these tabs, right? So if I go here, right, and go and select from, so it has postcode address group, but I go and select this one and make it current, so it is getting data from another segment altogether. Right now if I select this, it shows my mapping for address, but now if I go and select postcode, so it is grayed out. It is not selected because this segment is not current. So only one segment can be current, and each segment has a different from mapping and all these tabs here, right? So just keep that in mind. We have multiple exercises on the XML data that we'll be doing, so I hope that will help us to understand more in detail, but as of now this is what we need to do: handling XML data using query transformation. So I made these two segments correct and then unnested them. So I removed that one, and now I will use a target table and call it as demo_XML and click on OK and connect it with your query transformation and validate to see if there are any errors. No errors found. So select your job, right click and execute. Right, job is successfully done. Now we go and look at the data here. So now it is converted to a flat structure. The first postal code has 3 addresses. So if you go and cross check, SA019TB, SA019TB has flat 1, flat 2 and flat 3, 3 addresses. Just click on the up arrow, go to D150LQ, double click on this, and it has Eaton Hall and Garden Cottages. Right, so 2 addresses. So this is how you convert a nested structure into a flat structure. All I did is make them current, unnest them, and keep them in a flat structure. Right, so this is how a query transformation can handle this. So if I want to use one more transformation, which I told you that will handle XML data, is my XML pipeline. So if this is in my platform transformation, sorry, integrated transformations. If I go and pick that and connect it with my source and my target, and you open this, so there is no need for you to pull it from here. So you can directly go and pull it from the columns, because if you want to try it out using a query transformation to pull only the columns, so that is not possible. So pulling a column is not possible in query transformation. You can do it only from the parent node. But if you go to an XML pipeline transformation, you can directly pull it from here. But one limitation of XML pipeline transformation that you need to understand is it is one line item per header. So if a header has more than one line items, it will not go and pick them. So just wisely utilize whenever you need this. So I'm just deleting this one and validating the job to see if there are any errors. No errors found. And go and execute this one. So you can use XML pipeline to avoid unnesting making current when you have one line item per header. So if you look at this one, only the first records are picked. For SA019TB, it picks flat 1, and D150LQ, it picks Eaton Hall. Only the one line item is picked. The third transformation that can handle XML data is XML map. So drag and drop it and make it as normal mode. Right. So if you open this and see, it is pretty much close to a query transformation. You have mapping tab, you have where, you have distinct, group by, order by, advanced tab, find and replace. Right. So you have all these options. And one more thing, you can directly call in the columns here. Right. And you can go to the iteration rule and say propose a rule, and it will, whatever the default rule that is there, it will go and pick it. And now if you want to apply some where condition, you can go and apply, select distinct, group by, order by, advanced, and all these things. So you can do that thing here and connect it with your query target table, validate this, no errors found, and if you just run this. So this is like a query transformation for your XML sources. So job is successfully done. Now go to your data flow, open your open your target table. Now you see again the data getting populated like our query transformation does. SA019TB, you have flat 1, 1, 2, 3, and D150LQ. You have two addresses, Eaton Hardle and the Garden Cottages. So this is how we handle the XML data using data services. So three transformations that are widely used. One is your query transformation, XML map, and the third one is your XML pipeline. So pipeline limitation, one header per line item, one line item per header. Query transformation, you have to unnest that, make it current, unnest that, and then proceed with the development. But XML pipeline, it's almost like a query transformation for, XML map is like a query transformation for your this thing, XML data. So you can apply additional functions, everything within this one, and get this thing done. So that's it for today. We discussed on SQL validation and XML map. Along with this, we also discussed how we can handle XML data using query transformation and XML pipeline. So any questions in today's topics, please let me know. I'll be glad to answer them. If not, you can answer them tomorrow. Yeah, go ahead, Zafar.
Hey, Rakesh, can we do the validation for XML as well? Like, for example, in
yeah, so once you convert that into a flat structure, you can validate the data, and then again you also have an option to convert it back into a nested structure. So you convert it into a flat structure, validate the data, and then convert it back into a nested structure and push it into the target.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And any questions, Bhargav, Sandeep, Abdul, Lakshmi, Venkat?
Train వస్తుందా? Hi sir.
Yeah, Lakshmi, go ahead.
Sir, actually, these platforms, these all transformations are there, no, sir.
Mm-hmm.
It is a little bit confusion. You were saying that in the previous session that you see the designer guide, right, for this everything. So
Mm-hmm.
if I read out that and if I go and it will be easy for me. It is totally for me. It's very much confusing, sir. Like
Lakshmi, what
SQL and
simple suggestion I can give you is you go through these recordings 2 to 3 times, right? So for this first thing, understand what we are trying to do using case, right? So then you see what I am doing on the system and then try to repeat that so you will understand. So go one by one. So first case. So if you go through the document and read it, probably if your mode of understanding is you understand it good from the documents and books, then probably that will be helpful. But uh, it need a lot of efforts to go and read such a big PDF documents, right? So I kind of opened it and explained it to you properly, so you can go through these recordings again and again, and definitely that will help you out in understanding these things more properly, right? So go through these recordings, at least like it takes time. Like initially, even not even for you, but even somebody is coming from an SAP BI background to data services, from Oracle background to data services. So for them to get into this mindset, initially it will be a little confusing, but later once, the more you practice, the more you can easily understand this. So uh, my advice for you is to go through these recordings again and again and practice them on the system. Your confusion will go off.
okay, sir. Then about SQL also, I should practice, no, sir, regarding this SQL.
SQL is not required. See, whatever we do on this training is the most complex operations that you will utilize in a data services project. You don't go beyond this unless and until it is too much critical. Because from the last 5 years of this data migration projects handling experience, I can say, we will be looking at the most complex SQL operations that we do in the projects, right? So whatever we do on the projects, the most complex, I'm teaching them so that once you get into the market, once you start working, you'll feel everything as pretty much simple. So that is my strategy behind teaching that. So whatever we discuss here in the class, so if you can just practice them for SQL, that will be good. Or if you want to also gain some knowledge on SQL, there is one PDF called Dummies for SQL. You can download that from internet. So that's a free document, free PPT, PDF. You can download from internet and you can just read that and practice that on the SQL system. Anyways, the server which you got also has a server at SQL server. So you can just read that dummies for SQL and you can practice that on your system. If in case you want to acquire some knowledge on SQL, so that is the best way.
Okay, sir.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Right, thank you. So any more questions?
Hi Rakesh.
Yeah. Is this?
In row generation, yesterday you shown the previous class you shown how to connect two tables, like write the two tables. If there are more than two tables, how to connect them?
So is that related to row generation or query transmission? Joining two tables, that is what?
Yeah, joining two
No,
tables.
I didn't. So joining two tables can be done using, query transformation. So if I just go to this one, I'm just using some random data flow here.
You shown inner join, left outer join, and all, no, for two tables. If there are
Yeah,
more
that
than
is, yeah. So see, one thing, I got your question, I'm coming to that. So this is my source tables, and if I want to join them, I can use my query transformation. And if there are two tables, so you are asking about left outer inner joins that I'm trying to do, right?
yes.
So here I'll go and define which is my left outer source, and then the type of join and my right outer source. Now if I have a third table, what I will do is I'll call that third table here, and I make it as my source, and I use another query transformation, and I use a combination of these two here within this query transformation. And again I go to my from tab and define what kind of a join that I want here to be done. Okay, so did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Right, thank you man. Yeah. So now when we do this kind of joins, the customers or the data owners should tell us like what is your left outer source, what is your right outer source. So when you have three tables, so what is the combination, which two you have to go first and which is the second one, your data owners should tell us, because they only will have a clear picture on this one. Okay, so that is related to query transformation, not row generation. Row generation is used to create, it is used as a source when you don't have your source table available yet and you know the structure. So you can use the row generation and go and create the structure using this one.
Hey, Rakesh.
Yes, Zafar.
One last question. All the validation rules, all those things, we have all the information in the specification, right? So then we will follow the validation, right?
Exactly. So that's a very good question, Zafar. Let me take it to this one. So initially when you do this, you'll have something called as a mapping sheets. So just let me take you to that one. Or migrations. Mapping templates. So you'll have some mapping templates like this. So I'm picking material master. I know some randoms. So these are the best practices that I'm talking about. So SAP provides you with this mapping templates, but on a project level also, on any project, we'll create these kind of mapping templates, which has my source structure, my target structure, and to which column of my source, to which column of my target it is getting mapped to. Right, point number one. And point number two, it has these three additional columns here, right? System required, which is identified by star, which is nothing but our mandatory validation, right? And this is my lookup validation. And on the columns where I need to maintain my format validation, there will be some highlights or some comments on that. So I can also do these three validations. So your mapping sheets will have these things. One is your mandatory, identified by star. The second one is your lookup plus symbol, and the third one is the length of the fields. And you also have something called as a dollar symbol, so that represents a business rule. So if you have a dollar symbol present on a column, which means this has a conversion rule or a business rule available on that. So if you look at the business rule, you see this default the unit of measure AU to default AU for the material type DIEN. So for DIEN material type, so which is nothing but our MTART, right? This is the column. So if the material type is AU DIEN, then the unit of measure is AU, and for the rest of the materials it is EA. So this is a business rule, a sample business rule, right? So what we will do in this case, decode, if for this column you will go and write a business rule saying that decode if mara dot mtart is equal to it's not equal to, you can just say comma DIEN, then that's in single quotes, then it is AU, else it is EA. So I'll just let me zoom it out.
So this document you are showing is a specification or is a general guidance from the
So
SAP?
this is a standard template that SAP has provided. For each and every IDOC, material master, customer master, vendor master, so all the standard IDOCs, 45 IDOCs, SAP has given us a template job and also the mapping templates available. So they will go and use those template jobs. So that is what I was telling about BPDMs, best practices for data migration here. So in these BPDMs, they will give you a template job and also this the entire material related for you to build that job. So it can be your technical design document, it can be your this
So
thing.
in the real-time project, we need to follow this one, or we need to go
we will be following. We'll be, see, if it is your SAP project, we'll definitely follow, BPDMs, best practices for data migration. If your target table is an SAP table and you're trying to load that using an IDOC, then definitely we will go for BPDMs, best practices for data migration.
Actually, in my company, we got the specification from the functional people, and then we need to follow all the whatever they are asking. For example, if the validation is something like that, so we follow that one. So that's why I was asking.
This one is a template, Jafar, which needs to be updated by the functional consultants.
Okay.
So they will tell if this is a mandatory column, yes or no. This is just a template for their understanding. So they will go and change. This is a dummy business rule. So any business rule can't be like this. If it is this, it should be AU or each. So based on their business requirement, they will update the business rules here, and based on this thing, they will go and change these mandatories and all these things.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So Venkatesh, your question is, when can we see all functions like decodes and some other examples? We already saw them in when we are talking about query transformation. So please go through that recordings. I think you missed out that session. So please go through that. If you have still questions, you can reach out to me and we will look at that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm keeping some window here for you to go and explore, because me teaching will kind of override your thought process, and it will just limit your learning capacity to only what I teach. So I just leave a space there. I spoke about some of the functions that you generally use in the project, and rest I left it for you guys to go and explore that. So just try it out on your system, explore that, and if you have any questions on that, please you can. First thing is, even I might not have an answer for each and everything, but SCN has, so you can just search for that in SCN. You'll have some example with screenshots. Just in case if you don't get it there, you can reach out to me. I will also try it out from my end, and I will try to give you an output for that. Right, so any more questions? So thank you guys, thanks for your time and thanks for joining today, and we'll connect tomorrow. At the same time, we'll connect at 6 a.m. IST sharp, and we will proceed with the integrated transformation. So with today, we completed the platform transformations, which are the basic heart of your data migration project. So we go and look at any existing data migration projects. 99% of the transformations that are used are only from platform. So I personally encourage you to go ahead and look at the platform transformations, look at them again and again, so that you get them by hearted. And once you get into your project, somebody tells you a scenario that this is how I want this to be done, then you already have an answer saying that you can use this transformation. So we are done with the major part, then we will go and proceed with the integrated transformations. And this is our training plan. So we are almost there. we are halfway through, I can say that. So we are done with the platform transformations, and next we will start integrators. Integrators are pretty small, and when we are looking at integrators, we see the combination of transformations. So for example, map operation and table comparison, key generation, table comparison, history preserving, and a query transformation, pivot and reverse pivot combination, right? So we will see this combination of transformations of where we will be able to complete this pretty fast, and then we will also look at one transformation from quality, which is base match. And after that, we need to speak about the management tool. So that will take for 1 day. And after that, we will talk about the real-time jobs. That will take 1 day. And then introduction to HANA, HANA Studio. What is the basic architecture of HANA Studio? How do we log in? How do we set up a connection? So I just, want it to be a little more flexible for you guys. So once you get into a project on HANA, so you should have some basic foundation on that. So I'll just give you a heads up on how it works. So I'm also a HANA certified consultant. To tell more clearly, the first certified batch in India. So I wrote my certification in the first certified batch in India on HANA. So I'll tell you how this works with data services and how you do data provisioning. And once it is done, we will go with the project orientation session, which will be for 2 hours or a bit more, 2.5 hours, where we talk right from our sales call till our hypercare. So from sales call, how do you approach the customer, till our hypercare. So once go live is done, what are the different activities that you do? So I'll talk about each and every phase where which person get involved, where a manager, where a consultant, where a tester, where a fresher will get involved. So I'll talk about all these different phases of the project, and I will also walk you through my recent project where I did employee global consolidation, where we used some extensive features of data services. So we'll walk through that. With that we will be concluding this training. So we are pretty much halfway through. So my sincere request for you is to go through the recordings, sort out your questions, practice it more and more. Be ready for next session with your questions and also your understanding on that. So by the time we reach this phase, so it will be a cake piece walk for you. Right, so because you already know how each and everything work, and in this phase you will know how and where you have to organize them and deliver this project. Right, so we'll be talking about these steps here. So probably we'll be closing we are halfway through, I can say. So please be thorough on what we have learned so far, so that we can go and learn something new. Right, so but with this knowledge you can survive on the project. So that I can say with 50% of the course that you know by now, you can survive on the project. But sometimes to deliver excellence and to achieve some additional task, you also need the knowledge of an architect and the remaining transformations as well. So we will be looking at them in the second half of the project or training. Right, so guys, I appreciate your time and efforts and your interest, and this is quite interactive batch, I can say. I appreciate that efforts from your end too. So thanks for joining. Have a good day and good night, and we'll catch up tomorrow again. All right, bye for now.